The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you, O Lord.
While the crowd was pressing in on Jesus and listening to the word of God, he was standing by the lake of Gennesaret. He saw two boats there alongside the lake. The fishermen had disembarked and were washing their nets. Getting into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, he asked him to put out a short distance from the shore. Then he sat down and taught the crowds from the boat. After he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into deep water and lower your nets for a catch." Simon said in reply, "Master, we have worked hard all night and have caught nothing. But at your command I will lower the nets." When they had done this, they caught a great number of fish, and their nets were tearing. They signaled to their partners in the other boat to come to help them. They came and filled both boats, so that the boats were in danger of sinking. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at the knees of Jesus and said, "Depart from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." For astonishment at the catch of fish they had made seized him and all those with him. And likewise James and John, the sons of Zebedee, who were partners of Simon. Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on you will be catching men." When they brought their boats to the shore, they left everything and followed him. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Magandang tanghali po. I told you a story a long time ago about a conversation I had when I was a young seminarian with the superior of the house. And we were talking about confession and about different cases in confession and what to do with certain cases. And you would think confession is clear-cut, but actually it's not. And so I was having this conversation with my superior many years ago when I was a young seminarian, and he told me this story. He said, "What would you tell a woman who comes to you in confession, and in your conversation in confession with her, you realize that she uses contraceptives, and then you realize also that because she uses contraceptives, it goes against what the church teaches. But you also realize in your conversation with the woman that she is not aware that the way she uses it is wrong in her use of contraceptives. And what would you say to her? What would you do?" And I was thinking about it, and because I was a young seminarian, because I didn't know better, and because I was naive, I just told him the safest answer, which essentially is what we priests do when we listen to confession. I said, "Because she doesn't know it's wrong, I will correct her conscience and explain to her why it is wrong." What I didn't realize when I gave that answer was that I did not realize of the possibility that this woman, even though her conscience was instructed in the proper in the use of contraception, even though she was instructed in it, what I didn't realize was that she was not the only one involved in the use of contraception. Her husband was also involved. And also, I realized in hindsight that because she was poor and because of her educational attainment, things would be very, very different. In short, it did not dawn on me that even though I instructed her about the use of contraception, she might not be able to use it to follow church teaching. And yet I said that answer to my superior. I said, "I will correct her conscience." Surprisingly, my superior, who is a very opinionated man, but I love him so, was quiet when I gave him my answer. And I finally threw the question back at him, "What would you do?" And my superior surprised me with his answer. He told me in Filipino, "Hindi ko sasabihin sa kanya. I will not tell her. I will not tell her that what she is doing is wrong. Now, whether the answer of the superior was correct or not, these were my realizations when he told me that. I realized that my superiors, I realized that the issue was this. If you told the woman that what she was doing was wrong, and yet she would not be able to do it or correct it, then she would be sinning because you told her it was wrong. Because up to that point, she didn't know that it was wrong. Therefore, she probably wasn't sinning. And so, when my superior said I would not tell her, it made me realize something. How compassionate my superior was. That he was acting out of compassion towards this woman. Second, that my superior was willing to take on answering before God for the sins of this woman by keeping her in ignorance. Yeah, I mean, ang lalim ng realizations ko nung araw na yun because of what the superior told me. But that is not my point. My point is this one. I just realized from this experience, and this is the truth of it, that there is something destabilizing when God enters the picture. And sometimes that is our experience as human beings, as Catholics. That when God enters into our boats, into the pictures, into the picture and tapestry of our lives, there is sometimes something quite upsetting and destabilizing about God entering into our boats. And so I would like to share with you 3 points regarding the gospel that we just read today from the Gospel of Luke. The first is this. Jesus, in the gospel we see, enters the boat of Simon. And he does this without permission. He just jumps into the boat and enters. No warning, no permission. Almost an intrusion in the lives of Simon, who were mending their nets. For those of us, and I'm sure most of us have experienced it, as Filipinos, we love island hopping. And then we also experience from our occasions of island hopping that especially if the boat is small, when people start entering into the boat, there is something that the very act of entering the boat destabilizes the boat, that we sometimes have to hold on to something in order to keep our balance. And that is the reality of Jesus entering the boat of Simon Peter. Jesus, by entering that boat, destabilizes the boat, especially if the boat is small. And we have all indications that the boat of Peter was probably small. The boat of Simon was probably small. And why do we say that? Because towards the end, when they caught so much fish, and they even called the other boat, there was so much fish that the 2 boats were in danger of sinking. They were that small. And therefore, Jesus, entering into those boats, entering into the lives of his future apostles, was essentially destabilizing. It's a wonderful, wonderful image of what happens when God enters our lives, enters our boats. He destabilizes the boat that he enters. And this is the reality of Jesus entering into our lives, entering into our boats. It can be quite destabilizing. Think of Ignatius of Loyola, who was a soldier all his life, who was hit by a cannonball on his leg. And during his recuperation, because he couldn't move, he read the lives of the saints, and he was converted because of that. It was during the time when he was convalescing that Jesus entered into his boat and rocked his boat and rocked his world. And the rest is history. He founded the Society of Jesus. But imagine how much Jesus rocked his boat, considering that Ignatius of Loyola was a soldier at the early part of his adult life. Think of Peter, whose boat Jesus entered today. He was a lowly fisherman. He was Simon. And in the end, his name was changed to Peter. And this lowly fisherman, whose boat Jesus rocked, became the stone on which his church is founded and continues to stand. The truth of the matter is, brothers and sisters, when Jesus enters our boats, he rocks it. He destabilizes it. He throws us off balance. In short, when he enters our lives, it can be quite uncomfortable. I know this because when I became more serious with my faith, if you are like me, some of you probably find it very easy to say small lies, especially not to offend people. And that was quite easy for me for some time. But when I became more serious about my faith, I realized a lie is a lie. And therefore, it is quite uncomfortable that when people ask your opinion, and you really have to tell their opinion, I feel that I cannot even lie. I have to tell them the truth. Even though in our Filipino culture, it is quite painful to do that, to say that. And it has been quite uncomfortable for me and for the people I talk to. But that is the reality of Jesus entering our lives. It becomes quite uncomfortable. That is the first point. The second point is this. Towards the end of Luke, he was saying, or towards the middle, he was saying, getting into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, he asked him to put out a short distance from the shore. So a short distance from the shore. The boat wasn't really far from the shore. In short, the boat was in very shallow waters. Jesus enters the boat of Peter for the shallowest of reasons also. He needed to preach from the boat because the crowds were pressing against him. And if you think about it, when we allow Jesus to enter our boat, sometimes it is for the shallowest reasons. Sometimes it's because of the requirements of religion. We have no choice in this. Sometimes, for example, it's out of convenience. For example, when we work in a Catholic institution or in a Catholic school, we allow Jesus to enter in our lives just out of convenience. Sometimes we do it for show, as in we have a boyfriend or a girlfriend whom we like very much, and that boyfriend or girlfriend probably is a practicing Catholic, and you want to impress, you want to show that you are a practicing Catholic too, do it. And you allow Jesus to enter into your lives for the shallowest of reasons, for show. But my point is this. Even if we allow Jesus to enter our lives and our boats for the shallowest of reasons, that should not be trivialized. We should not look down on the fact that we are allowing Jesus to enter for the smallest of reasons. My good friend, my Chinese friend Tom, who was my student in oral English back in Tianjin during my missionary days there, when he found out I was a Catholic priest at the Cathedral of Tianjin, he attended my Mass. I didn't tell him to come, he just attended my Mass. And at the end of my Mass, he told me he was so moved by it, especially during the doxology when the priest raises the gifts and says, through him, with him, and in him. He was so moved by the whole thing that he shed tears, and he told me he wanted to be Catholic. And for many times he would tell me, my Chinese students told me he wanted to be Catholic, and I kept on telling him, you should go to the Chinese priest. It is better to learn the faith in your language than in mine. You will understand it better. And so I left China with Tom not being a Catholic yet. And yet 3 years ago, in my last visit to the United States, when he found out I was there, he drove all the way from Los Angeles to San Diego to see me and told me that he was already Catholic. Tom went to my Mass just out of curiosity. He allowed Jesus to enter his boat for the shallowest of reasons. Now, he is a Catholic. And that's why allowing Jesus to enter our boats for the shallowest of reasons should never be trivialized. Jesus may enter our boats initially in a shallow level, but the results can be quite consequential. Look at Peter. It was his boat that Jesus entered in the gospel today. That is the second point. The third and last point is this. After Jesus finished preaching, he tells Simon to set the boat into deeper waters and throw their nets for a catch. And of course, you know the story. Peter said they've been at it the whole night and they couldn't catch anything. Jesus was asking Peter to move from the relative safety of the shallows to the more dangerous part of the deep, of greater instability. And yet, this is the movement when Jesus enters our boats. He comes perhaps for the shallowest of reasons. and yet He ultimately leads us into deeper waters. I know that because as a priest, when God touched me in China as a missionary, He taught me how to pray again there. And I have never looked back ever since. He invites us. The movement when He enters our boats is to always go deeper. To always go deeper. And we should be ready for that. It is only when we go deeper that we are able to catch so much fish. The fruitless night that Peter and his companions had became fruitful because they followed Jesus into the deep. And our fruitlessness will also change, and we become more fruitful when we follow Jesus into the deep. In conclusion, actually my conclusion is not to conclude the homily, it is to conclude my stay with you. I am saying goodbye. This is the last time I will celebrate Mass with you. By next week I will be going to my new mission. And I would just wanted to leave early, but I know a lot of people are counting the days until the day I leave, and I think I owe it to you to say goodbye. I'd like to thank you very much for the years I had spent serving you at the Holy Sacrifice Parish. You know, before I came here, I've always looked at preaching not as important as a ministry that is not as important as other ministries of a priest. For example, I've looked at the service of the poor or the preaching of the gospel as something more important than preaching. And yet, it was because of my sojourn here in UP, because I had served you, because you spoke to me, because of your feedback, because you conversed with me, that I realized, you made this priest realize how important it is for us to always prepare our sermons properly, to reflect properly, and to be able to preach on the gospel properly. And I learned that in this parish. And I'd like to thank you for that. It is not the easiest thing to learn, but you taught me that in the last few years I had served you. Second, I'd also like to apologize for my shortcomings. I realize at the end of the day, whenever I listen to my homily, because I always try to learn from my mistakes, I realize there are so many subject-verb agreements that I usually do not catch. And despite the fact that I love English and it is perhaps my first language, I just realize that when you're speaking and your mind is multitasking, trying to go from one point to the next point, you just don't pay attention to subject-verb agreements much. And I'd like to apologize for that, for confusing you with regard to grammar. It's a mistake that I hope to improve on. The third is, I've always wanted to preach in a short time, but I realize lately it has gone longer and longer. But it is also because of this. I realize as I get older, preaching becomes harder, contrary to what you might think. It gets harder for me to preach, and it gets harder for me to develop the things I need to say. It is not easy. You might find that counterintuitive. And so when you see me struggling with the length of my homily, it is because I am struggling with the length of my homily. And I hope you forgive me for that. But I would also like to apologize for using my cell phone. Actually, it was only around the time of the pandemic that I started using my cell phone. Before, I would use mental bullet points and I would preach without looking at my cell phone. And yet I had so many places where I celebrated masses. And because I never wrote down my homily, I realized I tended to repeat myself. I didn't know what I said where. And sometimes I would say the same things to the same congregation. And I realized by putting it in my cell phone, I avoid that problem. And the things that I tell you, hopefully, are always fresh. And since I started putting things in my cell phone, I told myself it's easier to preach from my cell phone. I'll just do that. Forgive me for doing that. It's just the easiest way for me. I will be leaving for my next assignment, which is to serve the Filipinos in London. There are many Filipinos there. I will be replacing a priest who has worked with them for the last 20 years or so. It is something that, yes, excites me, but at the same time fills me with a lot of anxiety. And I just like to ask for your prayers as I say goodbye. I have prayed for you in the years that I have served you here in the parish. I hope that when you remember, say a little prayer for the Filipinos in London. Say a little prayer for this crazy missionary who will be serving them. And I hope that if you do visit London and we bump into each other, please introduce yourselves and remind me of UP. I carry you in my heart, but I also hope that you remember to pray for me that I may become a good and holy priest. Thank you. So much for short homilies. Let us now profess our faith. I believe in one God.